I'm going to be doing multiplication of fractions today, and I'm going to be doing it using folding a bit of paper. Now, I love doing this with my students because multiplication of fractions, although easy when you're doing the process, can sometimes create confusion because when we multiply two fractions together, let's do 1/4 times 1/2, often, particularly when you're using proper fractions, the product is smaller, and so that causes a lot of confusion for students. So I'm going to show you why the product is smaller when we're multiplying two fractions. I'm also going to show you how you can connect the multiplication and the process to something a bit more conceptual so the students can understand this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, or the first thing that I usually do, is I bring back what multiplication actually is to language that we use when we first introduce multiplication. So when we first introduce multiplication, we talk about it in terms of groups of. So we might say 2 times 3 equals 6 because 2 groups of 3 is 6. So I'm going to use that same language here, and I'm going to say, instead of 1/4 times 1/2, I'm going to say 1/4 of 1/2. So I want you to use this specific language here. I need to be able to get the students to connect the multiplication of fractions back to what actually multiplication is when they're dealing with whole numbers. I very rarely like to connect fractions to whole numbers, but in this situation, it's not about the number, it's about the process. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to bring you back to this bit of paper here, and I'm going to show you how I would get the students to do it. When we're looking at 1/4 of 1/2, that's what we want to try to do. We are actually taking 1/4 of 1/2. So first thing we need to do when we're trying to do that is we need to find our quarter. Now we always bring the fraction that we're dealing back to the unit that we're working with. In this case, I'm showing it as an area model. So I'm going to take my half of my original square, and that is what that looks like. I then need to take 1/4 of this. So I would find 1/4 of this half, and I would find it in any way you want, but I like to do it this way because it's easier to fold. Now, hopefully your students will do a better job of folding than I do, but here we go. So this little guy here is actually 1/4 of the 1/2, but that's not what we're trying to find. What we're trying to find is what size is this of the whole. To do that, to really be able to have a look at what this will look like when we open it up, I'm just going to mark that area there like that. And then I'm going to open my bit of paper up, and I'm going to go back to my whole. So this is when we were working with half of our quarter of our half. This is a little section that we ended up with. But if we look at our whole, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts now in total. So this little guy, this little piece here, is 1/4 of our half, but it is 1/8 of our whole. So we come back to our original question, which was this over here, and we now see that it is 1/8 when we folded the bit of paper. But if I look at my numerators and the denominators and my operation, what I can see is I simply multiplied my numerators and my denominators together. So this is what you would eventually get the students to start working on. I mean, you can get them to make as many folded bits of paper as you want, but eventually what you want to do is you want to get them to focus on seeing the link and making the connections to the conceptual and then to the abstract, because we do want the students to understand this process. We do want them to be able to apply it very, very quickly. That's how it works with unit fractions. When the two factors are two fractions, this is why the product is actually smaller, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a fraction of another fraction, which is obviously going to make your product smaller. So when you're explaining the reasoning behind why we multiply two whole numbers together and it gets larger, and then we multiply two fractions together and it gets smaller, then hopefully this method will help you and will help your students to better understand that. This is unit fractions. In the next video, I'm going to try to do this with proper fractions that are not unit fractions and show you how that's done. So I hope you enjoyed this though. We'll see you next time. Bye.